really excited to tell you that we've just started rolling out a very special partnership that will mean that the military community will now get completely free professional eating disorder screenings.
Welcome
Restart.
back to another episode of Beyond the Uniforms. Once again, we have an operator error before the show. Before we hit record, it's all fun and games behind the scenes. But if you are new to the show, welcome. Thank you so much for tuning in. We talk to military veterans, family members, influencers, experts in their fields to bring you the most accurate information. Try to eliminate all the misconfusion and all the chaos that is out there. And so it is clear as mud, basically. And so today we have Leah from Sea Waves with a nonprofit, and she has a great organization. And I think it's one of those things that is really not talked about as much, but it's very impactful. I think when you look in your personal lives, and I've had some family members that have had some, you specialize in obviously eating disorders and some other mental health issues, but eating disorders is the main one. Is that correct?
Correct.
Awesome. Okay. And so we have Leah Stiles again with Sea Waves. Leah, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Mike. I'm happy to be here. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, of course. We love to talk to people that are experts in their fields and really just provide the best information that we can for our listeners. So just share a little bit about your military background, your history, and how you got into Sea Waves.
Yeah, perfect. So I retired as a Navy senior chief. I served for 20 years on active duty. During my service, I had an eating disorder the entire time. The first 10 years, it was extremely secretive. Nobody knew, not my family, friends, loved ones. Nobody knew at all. It was just an internal secret. The next 5 years of my career, I knew that there was a problem and that I needed help, but everywhere I knew to find mental health help had nobody that was specifically qualified to assist or treat eating disorders. At that point, I was already a chief petty officer, and I was pretty aware of the resources that are available. And I tried to seek those out on my own and really just came up with nothing. The last 5 years of my career, they were really difficult, Mike. It was very difficult. Unfortunately, I experienced a string of back-to-back suicides in my loved ones. That include my mother, my niece, and I actually walked in to find my mentor as a completed suicide. And that really spiraled my mental health, obviously, right? And that made my eating disorder just really rage out of control, because eating disorders are just so comorbid with trauma and, a PTSD and those things. So it makes sense that they go hand in hand. And I was on a deployment in the middle of the ocean on the world's finest aircraft carrier, CVN-77. Shout out to them. And my eating disorder was really, really affecting my health. At that point, I was purging probably about 8 times a day. And so that led to a lot of dehydration and other physical impacts on my health. So my command intervened, and they medevaced me back to the States. When I got back to the States, I went to the world's largest Navy base, and there wasn't anybody in that hospital that was qualified in eating disorders. And so I got bounced around a lot. I ended up in some pretty scary places and psych wards and different places that they just tried to plug me to be, I guess, to try to help, but it definitely exasperated the conditions even more. And by the time I really found a place to take TRICARE and receive help, I was living on an NG tube in my nose to support me, and that lasted for on and off for almost 2 years.
Wow.
After that, I retired medically from the Navy, and I thought that that was my chance to like really get into recovery, to change it. I didn't have to do the public weigh-ins or meet standards that are so important to meet for your career, things like that. So I thought that would be a great opportunity to get into recovery. And I had a conversation with my mentor, the same leader that medevaced me off of the ship. And he said, I believe you, Leah, that you want to heal. I believe you that you want to get better, but you're never truly going to get better while you're still hiding and being secretive about this.
Mm.
So in a moment of, I guess, maybe spite or rebellion, um I posted on Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook to everybody. So everybody found out at the same time. My shipmates, my coworkers, my loved ones. I just ripped the band-aid off, right? And I'm not really, the post my personal information at all on social media anyways. So that was just out of my comfort zone. And when I did, of course, it was amazing to find, that there was support that I wasn't even aware of, from the people around me that really truly cared once I shared with them. But Mike, what happened after that was just bigger, and that's what led to Sea Waves. So I started getting contacted by a lot of different people. It really became like a movement, and they were so bravely sharing their stories or relating or sharing the stories about people that they care about, their shipmate, their daughter, their uncle, um, other people that are struggling. And it was so amazing that they were just bravely telling their stories. But all those conversations really ended up in the same way. They ended up with the question of, now what?
Mm.
Well, being my personal experience that I lived through, being a senior chief and a leader, being a mother, um, and being somebody that has lost way too many people to suicide, I was not willing to not answer that now what question. So my answer to that question was founding my nonprofit Sea Waves.
No, that's a very touching and powerful story. It's tough for people to be vulnerable and share what has, I hate to use the word quote unquote made them feel like they're weak, but it's that moment. I think what you did was you opened up and you let that be known to the world, and it's kind of like a release. I think for a lot of people, is like you hold this thing inside of you and you don't want anybody to know, but you're fighting these demons inside, for lack of better terms. And there's something that happens when you publicly announce that or you release that finally, and it's like there's this sense of overwhelming relief that you can get that weight off your shoulder, and maybe you can finally either get the help that you need. You can let that stigma go. You can let that negativity, because having served both in the military and in law enforcement, there's always these labels that are put on people, and mostly for us in our professions, and we don't want to let certain things free because of what people will think of us. There's rumors, there's all these other things, and I one commend you for that, because it takes a lot of courage and bravery for that, and thank you so much for sharing that story to everybody. But two, I think there's a lesson to be learned there, especially for anybody that's listening to this that might be dealing with the same issues. For you, when you quote unquote ripped that band-aid off and you finally let everybody know that you were suffering from this and you wanted to just release it, I guess how did you finally make that? Because you're internally, like, you're fighting that. It's like you want help, but you're also battling, I'm afraid to release that out because what are people going to think to me? For anybody who might be battling that same, internal conflict, like what would be an easy, or I don't want to say easy is not the right word. What would be a way for somebody to just make that transition and go and take that next step, I guess, like you did?
Yeah, so I would absolutely say, without a shadow of the doubt, is my advice would be to just find one person. just find one person that you can talk to or share with or vent to. um Life is really not meant to be done alone, Mike. Like, we are
Yeah.
meant to support each other, and we especially know that in the military context and our camaraderie. Like, that's what we're supposed to be, as a team. And so, just like you wouldn't tackle any other hurdle or mountain by yourself, mental health and dark spaces and eating disorders are really the same way. Do not go through that alone.
No, and that's a really good tip, because I think we feel a lot of times in those situations, and even myself, I've been through a couple rounds of depression, and just sometimes you just feel like you are alone, and you want to talk to somebody, and you feel like you want to confide in somebody, but then you, for one other reason or not, you don't, or you feel like you're going to be judged, and so you just hold it in, right? And sometimes that may, even if you are married, or even if you have loved ones that are close to you, sometimes they may not be the ones that you want to release that information to. It
Mhm.
might be a best friend. It might be a fellow veteran. So, just for anybody listening, just think outside the box, that just because you are married, or you have children, or you have a mom or a dad and they love you unconditionally, and you still don't feel like you can open up to them, just don't forget your outer circle of other friends and veterans. And because there's been times where I've actually been able to speak to veterans more than I have, who are also my best friends, than I have been able to my close family, right? And just sometimes that may be the only opportunity that you have to, open that door. Um, and there's a lot to go into on this, so I want to try to hit on like maybe two or three topics, for so for people that may be going through this process, and like if you're a commander, you're a first sergeant or anybody like that, or even if you're in law enforcement listening to this and you're a supervisor role, what would be some signs, now that you've been on both sides, what are some signs that somebody might be exhibiting some kind of eating disorder? Because we can also look at eating disorders, and I don't want to branch this off too far, but we can also look at eating disorders in two opposite ends of the spectrum. You can do overeating and you can do undereating, because people have this eating disorders where they just don't eat at all. They're like, they're anorexic. They, I hate to use the stereotypical, ideas of, but they eat and then they either go throw it up, or they just don't eat and they try to stay skinny as possible. But on the opposite end, you have those that, that just eat and eat and eat. So, aside from those obvious signs, that you've been on both sides, what may be some signs as like a commander or a supervisor might be looking out for?
So I'm really happy to answer that question, Mike. And in fact, we developed an entire training at Sea Waves called MEDAL. It's the Military Eating Disorder Awareness and Literacy Training. And it's literally that we go over this. We teach leadership, what it looks like, what it doesn't look like, what can be helpful, what can be more triggering or unhelpful, and then how to get resources and help and support. So, a couple things that, really surprise people, I think, when I give this training is, the stereotypes that we used to think about eating disorders, the 90s and 2000s Lifetime channels, where there was a young white female, very frail and very tiny, and, it looked like malnutrition, and, or, maybe they were on Oprah or Phil Donahue. I remember. It's really not that anymore, Mike. And so it's important to show that those are misconceptions, right? Eating disorders affect 1/3 of females in the military and 1/5 of males in the military. They do not discriminate from gender or rank or any other criteria. They can affect anybody and everybody. And then the interesting thing about it is, when I ask leadership, picture anorexia, picture your team of 30, knowing that 1/3 of those females have an eating disorder. Could you find me the one with anorexia? Mike, do you think you could?
I mean, I don't. I mean, other than that's a good question. If I were to look at somebody, and based on my already preconceived notions and thoughts of what I have experienced in the past, based off of like TV shows and stereotypes, maybe. But I think that would be very difficult, because people's body shapes and sizes they're all different, So you could easily misguess somebody who is just naturally thin, which is what I was all my life. I went into the Air Force weighing 119 pounds. I'm almost 6 feet tall. Right? That's crazy. But I wasn't, in my mind, I didn't have that. So to answer your question, no, I mean, realistically, no, I don't think I could.
Most people couldn't. And so
Yeah.
sorry to put you on the spot.
No, you're
but
fine.
yeah, I like really just having that conversation. The data and statistics, the data and statistics might shock you that only 6% of people with anorexia have fallen into the medically underweight category. So if you're looking at your team and you're looking for malnutrition, anorexia based off underweight category, you're going to miss it 94% of the time.
Wow, that's a high percentage. I mean, because like I said, for a guy extremely skinny going into basic training, almost 6 feet tall, weighing 119 pounds for a guy. I mean, that's kind of, but I think a lot of people, they think of anorexia and, problems around that is like, people are just bone skinny. They look malnourished. They're frail, all the things that we thought, either growing up or what's been publicized on TV. But yeah, that's a very high percentage, 94%. Wow.
In fact, Mike, I'll tell you, I know some people are listening in here and some people can see us talking, and, I'm no skinny mini, and my diagnosis is anorexia. So when I'm in the room and I introduce myself as somebody with anorexia, leadership and people in the military just really have a hard time understanding and processing that.
Yeah.
And so the same thing with like malnutrition. What we used to think that malnutrition had a real look and that we could identify it, but now we call it low energy availability, which really just means that with our disordered behaviors and eating, that we're not giving our bodies what they need for one reason or another. And this goes back to the spectrum that you talked about too, right? Like, so we have like the green spectrum that's, intuitive and healthy eating. Then we have the yellow and orange spectrum that is disordered in some kind of way, either by, excessive food, restriction of food, some kind of disordered behaviors in there. And sometimes some people have both simultaneously, right? And then the bad part of the spectrum that's just red and dangerous is actual eating disorder and a diagnosis. So there's opposite ends of the spectrum. And so we know now with all of this research that's coming out that if you're in anything but the green area, you're susceptible to low energy availability. And what that looks like can be brain fog. It can be low morale, emotional distress. It could be recovering from injury or illness much slower. So there's a bunch of things that we're learning now beyond malnutrition and ways that it affects us. And you see this a lot with young athletes too. And what I try to say is low energy availability is a danger to our military community. If you think about a person that has been, standing on a flight deck on an aircraft carrier in the middle of the sea in over 100-degree weather, landing aircraft precisely, and they have brain fog, like this is dangerous. This affects our readiness. And so that's why it's important that if you're outside the green at all, that you're seeking support to help get yourself back to that side of the spectrum.
Awesome. So let's say, you are a commander, first sergeant, or whoever it might be. And let's say you may have possibly identified somebody that may have, an eating disorder or condition. One, what would be the best way to bring that up with the individual without coming across as offensive? And then two, what should be the next steps that, that commanding officer, whoever, should take to get that person the right help?
Right. So this makes me realize that I didn't fully answer your previous question either.
No,
That
you're good.
what are they looking for? What is leadership looking for? And I'll tell you personally, in my experience, some of the things that I did to hide from doctors, family leadership. Number one, I would avoid social settings where there's food. And in the military, we celebrate everything with
Mm.
cake and food. So I would always plan to be busy during that time.
Mm.
If I was available or had to go to these events, especially as senior leader, you have to go to these tables and everybody's watching you. So I would eat. I would come up with excuses to explain what I was or wasn't eating, such as I'm currently doing intermittent fasting and this is my fasting window. And it was, but instead of it being 3 hours, it was 3 days. But nobody asked that next level of question. It just simply
Sure.
was me intermittent fasting. Or I would say, oh, I'm keto and there's nothing here that's keto. So I ate just before, or I'll eat just after, right?
Mm.
And most of the time that would work. And then when it would progress to I really just have to eat what they're eating because my excuses are not applying here, then I'm making an escape to the bathroom. And looking back, I think that you could see how anxious I was. I would be shaking and looking at the clock and my watch because I didn't want to leave that food inside of me any longer than I had to.
Mm.
So I would get straight to the bathroom. Now, if there's somebody in the bathroom or there's multiple stalls, I would say, oh, I had bad sushi last night. That's why you hear me, throwing up. Or if
Yeah.
I, hurried up and would walk out of the bathroom and, my eyes were red and puffy and, my hands had bite marks on them from putting them down my throat. I would say, allergies, or, I would say something to explain my red face or my eyes. And so that's really where that deception and secret and lies just continue to suck you in over and over. So if you're in that position where you recognize some of those things that I just said, then number one is make sure that you're talking to this person in private, right? Do not call them out. We should never, ever, ever be commenting on somebody's food or body in public to anybody. That should be just like politics and religion. Don't touch it. There's no place for it, right? So no comments on food, no comments on the body. But when you approach somebody one-to-one, just as you would as a leader of somebody struggling with PTSD or depression or suicidal ideation, it's approaching them with a calm and concern way that's open, and present your concern with the opportunity of engaging in conversation. When I was coming up in the Navy, we called that intrusive leadership. Sit down and ask these questions, open-ended questions of, hey, I noticed last month we were worried that you weren't going to make weight for PRT, and you dropped that weight pretty quickly. How did that happen? What did you do? And, what was your method and how do you feel about that? Things like that. And just expressing your observations and your concerns. And so always use I statements. So don't say, I saw what you ate, or I saw you go to the bathroom, or I know what you've, been doing or hiding. Really bring it back to the I part of it. Like, I want to support you. I am concerned. I validate what you're going through. I would say that's the best advice I could give.
No, that's really good because I think a lot, especially for anybody who might be going through this, because you don't want anybody to know, and then when somebody does approach you, like natural reaction, I think, is to just deny it, like everything is okay, and you just don't want to deal with it. You don't want to talk to it. You just want to end the conversation to be over.
Mhm.
But and I think the other thing is that especially in like law enforcement, like as well, there's always these labels, and you don't want to go get professional help because you're always going to be seen as the weakest link. Now your coworkers and your fellow officers are going to be like, oh, well, we can't trust this guy because he's suicidal or he's got mental issues or whatever the negative, association might be. But I think when you are in a supervisory position, coming at it from a place of empathy, I think will really help that person open up. That you actually like, and it sounds silly, but like be a human, right? Like don't just come at it from the position of your rank,
Mm-hmm.
and don't come from it as Captain or General Stiles, right? Come at it from Leah, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when you come from that position, you're removing the rank aspect. I know this is a completely different subject of breaking rank and all that stuff in the military, of course, but there's a time and a place for that, I think. And when you are connecting with a person, that I think has way more impact than, take the sleeves off. It's me and you, just me and you. That was the biggest thing that we were always taught. The sleeves come off, stripes come off, the bars come off. It's just me and you. And that might be something that, for anybody who's in that position, that to be able to reach out and connect with somebody. Last couple of questions is, so people might have a question of like, okay, do you have doctors? Do you have physicians? Like, how do you work with people like that? And then also, you touched on it briefly, but resources, like, what do you guys provide, and how do you help them?
So that was something I really have been intentional about with Sea Waves, is connecting my military community. So we're talking active duty, veterans, National Guard, family members, and honestly, even first responders have been part of this process. And so I connected them with the eating disorder professionals and communities that I have relationships and partnerships with. And so these relationships can help remove a lot of the barriers and hurdles to seeking help in care. So, for example, we have a relationship with Crisis Text Line. If you text WAVES, WAVES, to 741-741, you'll get around the clock free support that is completely 100% confidential. And you can even ask to have your conversation, your text, or verbal conversation to be stripped and deleted. So that's like the emergent kind of support, right? That you can reach just in a moment. It's called Crisis Text Line, but what they really want to do is help you de-escalate things before the crisis. And then it's really just assessing the level of support that they want, that they need, or that their loved ones need, and plugging them in with the different partners that provide that support. And what we do at Sea Waves is we make sure that support never, ever, ever comes at a cost to our military community out of pocket. So there's a variety of different levels of support that would go from an online support community to eating disorder coach that is on standby 24/7, that you can reach out to, that works with your primary care physician or your nutritionist or some kind of provider and provide that support. There is now options for inpatient and residential treatment. Places that, even though they don't take TRICARE, we've arranged other ways to work out the financial part of that. And I'm really excited to tell you that we've just started rolling out a very special partnership that will mean that the military community will now get completely free professional eating disorder screenings. So this is with a doctor that can answer their questions of, is this a disordered eating? Is this temporary? Is this serious? Is this a mental health issue? And then they can then take that letter from that doctor back to their primary care physician and ask for help.
Wow, that's amazing. Wow. Well done on that. Awesome. All right. Last question is anybody who may be looking for your services or maybe going through a situation that they might need some help, or even if you're a commander, supervisor in that role and would like more information, or even if anybody wants to reach out and support your organization, what you're doing, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
Absolutely. The website, www.c-waves.org.
Okay. Easy enough. All right. Any last words of wisdom or tips or advice or anything?
No, I just like to say, be a lighthouse for people. Shine your light when you can for those that are still in the dark. and helped me shine a light on eating disorders in the military.
Yeah, that's one of those things I honestly don't think was talked very much about. In fact, I don't even know if it was ever brought up. Of course, this was years ago. I started in 2001, but it's just one of those things where I don't think is very talked about very much. I guess might be the easiest way to put it, just because people don't think about it. They think of other things like mental health, injuries, suicide, the bigger issues. But this one is definitely up there. I think it's just one of those emerging things that people are starting to now become more aware of it because they can see the bigger impact of it.
So just a last two stats on what you brought up, Mike. Number one, eating disorders have the second highest mortality rate of all mental illnesses.
Wow.
And in some studies, they have the highest mortality rate. And that leads to the next question is, what's killing us then, right? And the number one cause of death for somebody with an eating disorder is suicide, Mike.
Wow. Yeah, I can see that because it ties in other things. Obviously, if you have an issue with eating, whether it's not enough or too much, then there's obviously some underlying issues in there. And generally that is depression or other mental health issues or suicide, unfortunately, because overeating and undereating is generally not a typical, I hate to use the word normal, but that's not a normal behavior. So there's obviously, that's a symptom, I guess is the way to put it. It's not the underlying cause, but it is a symptom. And generally it's the symptom of depression or suicide. So, man, wow. All right, Leah, well, this is great. Thank you so much for taking some time out of the day to talk to us about this. I'm going to bring some more awareness to this, and hopefully we can help you push your message out more to the military community, especially reach the people that really matter. And by that, I mean like the commanders and the people that actually have some sort of influence, first sergeants, whoever it might be, that can step in and take those authoritative and leadership roles in helping, their troops out, because a lot of people, I feel like you said, are battling this and dealing with it on their own. They just don't want to go to the first sergeant. They don't want to go to the captain or the lieutenant or the colonel and go, I have a problem,
Right.
So, but, thank you so much for this organization and what you're doing. Thanks for your service. And we really appreciate you being on today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.